Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. So this morning I wish to preach to you from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And at least to tie in from your Old Testament reading, thank you, Dan, that was wonderful, the idea that comes from the Old Testament that when the first temple was founded and Solomon preached there, that it was intended to be for all people, a place that all people could come to know the living God. And wind together with it from our Gospel of John that you have just heard me read, that there is this life that is a life among the Spirit that we're invited to, that challenges us in a way, remembering that some of those disciples, in fact a lot of them, found it to be too hard, and so they turned away. And Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "Do you wish also to go?" And they said, "No, we cannot help but stay with you." But that the challenge of the Christian life can be difficult. So let me begin by some stories, and let me say first, I searched all over for a joke. But what we're going to talk about today is, in some sense, is no joking matter, except that I will say to you that each of these stories that I'm going to tell you are actually jokes in our family where we laugh about them, and yet there's import. So my husband's brother John always accused him of being too dramatic when he would tell stories about the difference and the way he was treated when he would go into restaurants, first with just his two biological sons who were white, and then with adding one of our Haitian sons when he was black. And John, who lived out in liberal California, always said, "Oh, you're exaggerating, Stephen." And Stephen would say, "No, I'm not." And then one of our sons went out to visit John, Lucien. They had a wonderful time, and Lucien's plane flight back to the East Coast went out of San Francisco's airport at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so they got up early and got on the road around 4 o'clock in sleepy Mill Valley, across the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County from downtown San Francisco. We're driving along sort of groggy and sleepy, and a police car with lights on and light sort of going around on top literally pulled across the front of them and cut them off. Ordered them out of the car with their hands on the top of the car, kicked their legs out on both sides, and patted them down. Lucien made it to the airport in time, and John never accused Stephen of being too dramatic after that. Now, some of you have enjoyed our Haitian art shows here, and some of you have even met our good friend Lionel de la Tour. He is the one who coordinates those shows, and Lionel is nothing if not proper and diplomatic. He's handsome. He was educated at Georgetown and then at Harvard, and he actually served his country, Haiti, as a diplomat in the 80s in their embassy in Washington, D.C., a city he just loves. His own son now has followed in his footsteps and attends Georgetown. And about 20 years ago, Lionel had wanted to store some Haitian paintings in Stephen's house in the Georgetown area. So Stephen said yes, and when it was time to pick them up, he wasn't going to be in town, but he told him how to come and pick up the paintings, and all was well. And so Lionel pulled up in front of the house, and he made a quick phone call before he went in. So he was in his car a short time. Then he went in the house, and he went in the living room and got the paintings out and was working with what he needed to do. And all of a sudden, in the back door and the front door, burst two SWAT teams. Guns up, in SWAT gear, guns up, ready, yelling, and went in and ordered him to the ground. He wanted to reach and started to reach for his wallet, and they ordered him to not move. Unfortunately, he followed their orders and didn't move. Lionel said he never told his parents. When we laugh about that today, he said he never told his parents. He was too embarrassed to have been treated like a criminal, and he had always told his parents how wonderful the United States was, and he didn't want them to change their opinion of the country. But he also knew that they might not really understand the kind of racism that had prompted that event. A little over 10 years ago, Dubon, you'll have to correct me if I have this story wrong. Dubon came from Maryland, where he was living in an apartment with some folks, and was going to live with us in Virginia to help take care of my mother. And so in order to move himself over, he had to make a couple of trips. And he also had a temporary tag in Maryland on his car and decided to wait till he got to Virginia, because that was going to be his new address, in order to be able to get, a new license plate for his car. So he was driving along in his Volvo, actually right next to the church where I served in Arlington, a pretty white community, and a policeman pulled him over. And without any discussion really at all, accused him of driving illegally, and went and tore his temporary tag off the back of the car and ripped it up. So Dubon walked home. It took us 2 weeks to sort out what had actually gone on. They had accused him of driving improperly with a temporary tag from another state. And $700 later, and we both had gone to every cash machine we could to put together the $700, and 2 weeks later, he finally could get his car back. Now, we found out later it was illegal for the policeman to have ripped up his temporary tag. Therefore, he couldn't drive it off of a lot, but after $700, we decided it probably wasn't worth it to try to take him to court to figure out what had gone on. And then there was 5 years ago, my daughter Anne's rehearsal dinner was in downtown Baltimore for their wedding. And Stephen Dubon and I were driving back out from downtown the night of the rehearsal dinner. We were all tired. Dubon was in the back, I was in the front, and Stephen was driving. And I was really tired, so I put my seat back so I could sort of sleep, and Stephen thought he wouldn't make it all the way, so he pulled off at Cold Spring Lane, there's some kind of 7-Eleven or something there, to get some coffee, got out of the car without his shoes on, because his feet hurt, and walked into 7-Eleven. As he came out of that 7-Eleven there, he came out, and there was this plainclothes fellow that turned out to be a plainclothes policeman, but he didn't know it. And he walked up to Stephen and he said, "Are you all right?" And of course, Stephen, believe it or not, he's used to people asking him that. So, sticky outy hair and no shoes on. He said, "Oh, I never wear my shoes. Besides, my feet hurt, so that's why I walked without my shoes." And the plainclothes policeman said, "No, are you all right?" and looked at the car. Turns out he thought Dubon had a gun pulled on me in the car. Stephen said, "Oh no, that's just our son. We're just driving back from our daughter's rehearsal dinner." You all heard me tell stories when I came back last year from Jerusalem, and how I'd watched the Israeli police and the army together wearing SWAT gear, chasing down teenagers and harassing old women who were trying to get to the Dome of the Rock on the high holy day of Ramadan to pray. How air bombs were being fired from rifles, and there were tanks that were sort of turning around in the streets and spraying this stuff called skunk that's especially developed as a non-lethal weapon. It smells exactly like decaying flesh in combination with human waste. And in fact, it's a liquid that has a surfactant on it, so that when everything it lands on, it can't actually be washed off. It has to wear off. So literally 10 days after the streets and the storefronts and the people were all sprayed, you could still smell it. And I remember I was just horrified by the demeaning treatment of our Israeli brothers and sisters, the way they treated their Palestinian brothers and sisters. And then I came home to the United States in August last year. And first there was Ferguson. And then there was a fellow selling individual cigarettes in New York City, got choked to death. And then Tamir Rice, who was a little boy playing in a park in Cleveland, and he lost his life. Michael Gray here in Baltimore. There was a woman in Texas that was going back to her alma mater to start her life again and didn't use her turn signal and ended up gone. Or back in my hometown of Cincinnati, a father of 10 who had a bullet in his head for, I don't know what the offense was. I mean, I live here in these United States. This is my home. And it has slowly dawned on me that the same treatment and tactics that I witnessed in Israel that had so offended me were actually a part of my own culture, and I barely knew it or acknowledged it. I was visiting a niece in Cleveland this week, and in their city, they're still trying to wrestle with what to do in a 2-year-old case where a black couple in Cleveland were in a car that backfired. And a policeman came out at them aggressively in his car, and they took off. By the time they got done, there were 23 police cars involved in a citywide chase that ended in basically a massacre where rounds and rounds and rounds of bullets were had encompassed them and their car. And it turns out at the end of the day, they didn't even have a gun with them. So I think when the Apostle Paul speaks to the Christian community in Ephesus and to us about putting on the whole power of Christ and girding ourselves in truth and finding shoes that will allow us to go out and preach the gospel of peace, I think what he was talking about, in fact, in the lesson says that this is the armor, not literally that we put on, but figuratively, the armor of faith that we don because we are in a different kind of battle. Paul says that it's not a battle with flesh and blood and not with other human beings, but a battle with the powers who work against peace. A battle with the kind of violent and destructive thinking or the institutionalized defense mechanisms that dehumanize those who practice that kind of thinking and acting, and the others who are their victims, who live cowed with fear or hardened for battle themselves. And when Paul talks about a kind of preparation and courage that it will take to live as a Christian in this world, and the kind of prayer that we are invoked to follow, and a kind of reliance on God and our faith that will be needed to stand for this gospel of peace, well, I think we know, if we allow ourselves to be honest, we know what he is talking about, don't we? It is hard to stand for peace. I was watching a speech on a news program from John F. Kennedy in the early 60s, and I was struck by the way he sort of offhandedly referred to what he assumed to be a guiding principle from our earliest days of our founding and would actually hold throughout our history. A foundational myth of our country, if you would. He spoke with confidence, and just utter confidence, that the United States would never start a war. And here I was watching a news program, and I cried. I think we become less of who we were intended to be as created by the God who loves us, not so much in one fell swoop or by one decision, but little by little. And so what I think Paul is telling the people in Ephesus is to stand and to stand for peace, and that it will be hard, and they will not be able to do it on their own, but with God's help and with their faith, all is possible. He warns them against the temptation to believe that any human agent is their enemy, and instead boldly invites them to contemplate the kind of forces they will encounter when they are attempting to change hearts and to change ingrained systems. And that is a message we need now more than ever. I think we still believe our foundational myths about ourselves as Americans, that we are driven by freedom and equality for all, and it's to be shared with everyone. And we forget that our founding documents include the acceptance and characterization of slavery. We kind of just forget that part and what it has meant. We still believe, most of us, don't we, that we don't start wars. We've imagined all kinds of ways to explain that. We don't start wars, even though we can look at a Middle East today that is strewn with the effects of the wars we have started. The words on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," are a beacon, have been over a couple of centuries, to others, and embody what we think is our openness to other human beings joining us in this adventure of democracy. They are an ideal that we hold for ourselves in this country that is now being courted by would-be politicians with suggestions of walls, not unlike those that I saw in Israel or saw in historic settings in Berlin when the communist and the democratic countries were walled off from each other. And we have trouble saying, a wall? What does the physical presence of a 3-story high wall with barbed wire, what does it say about the people on either side? And what does it say about the hearts of those who build it? I sat with my own children when the Berlin Wall came down in the 90s. And all of a sudden, I started weeping. I mean, I sobbed. And here were my poor children saying, "What's wrong, Mom?" As that wall was being dismantled. And I said, "You know, I remember when it was built. And for as long as it has been there, I have also had a wall in my own heart that today is being dismantled." I think it will take the kind of courage that Paul speaks about to shift our discussion in many areas of our life from demonizing others to the real discussion of our fears, of our own prejudice and greed, of our pride, and of our misuse of power. How many of you really embrace the idea that really emerged in the early 90s? We're not the revolutionaries fighting against King George anymore, like our founding myth. We are the empire that holds keys to all kinds of things, and how we use that power is really important. Pope Francis said that even today we raise our hand against our brother and sister. We have perfected our weapons. Our conscience has fallen asleep. And we have sharpened our ideas to justify ourselves. As if it were normal, we continue to sow destruction. Violence and war lead only to death. The church has a voice in this debate. Ours is a voice for life, a voice for peace, not war, a voice for forgiveness, not retaliation, a voice for love, not hate. And it's not a joke. Amen.